Hey, welcome to the Push-Pull Sales and Marketing Podcast. I'm Marcello.
And I'm Sherry. In each episode, we provide you with sales and marketing strategies that you can implement immediately into your own business. Today, we're going to be talking about asking the right questions to make sure that you get that close or that sale, or at least get your foot in the door. But real quick, we want to let you know that we have set up a Patreon page. So our rewards include things like shout outs on our episodes, cold calling scripts, website reviews, or phone consults. You can go to patreon.com/pushpullsales to check out all the details. And in advance, we appreciate all your support for sure.
Yeah, cool. All right, so diving right into it, talk about asking the right questions, and this is important in every single part of the actual sales cycle. So we'll go ahead and start in the beginning. So in the beginning, when you're cold calling and you're trying to find the right person, right? And in fact, in some of our other previous, appointment setting, we did discuss that. And actually now there's some better ways and some better questions you can ask. And again, tiny tweaks you can make. Mm-hmm. So before, for example, if I were to reach out to a company and I didn't know who the actual decision maker was, you can say like, hey, I was hoping you can help me out. Who would be the person who handles this? Which definitely is a step up from who is the decision maker in that. Cause like decision maker, like so many sales reps have used that term and then they're like, like stuff I don't want to give it.
Yeah. Stuff you've used before might get a little bit stale or it gets too familiar. It turns into more of a cliche, which we see, with like industry buzzwords and everything, mm-hmm. Every industry has this where if you use the same phrase or even the same word too often, it could trigger a negative connotation of a past sales rep that they didn't like that also used that phrase.
And speaking of negative connotations and all that good stuff, so I know one of your biggest pet peeves for you personally is somebody asking you a question on something that our demigod Google could have answered.
Right.
So, someone's like, hey, how do you do it? And you're like, I don't know. But then you just Googled it and you figure out the answer for them.
Yeah. There's actually like a fake website that you can, I forget, it's like masked somehow that it looks like a legitimate like resource website and all it says is Google it.
That's too funny. That's too funny. I like that. So to kind of like put that into context, what we're talking about then is, so again, when you say like, hey, I'm hoping to, talk to the person who handles this, you want to add a little bit, it's not exactly persuasion in terms of like, hey, you sound like a really open-minded person. It's more like, it's more of like just a tiny preface that makes it which makes it apparent that you did your research to say, hey, right. I looked on LinkedIn and I'm not sure, I wasn't able on my research looking on your website or on LinkedIn, who handles this? For the most part, like when we deal with that, it's normally like the head of engineering, but maybe you can help me out. So again, by adding that tiny tweak in terms of like, hey, I was looking on your website, I was looking on here, I couldn't find that person, because if not, everyone's going to be like, well, you haven't.
Just look on the website or like.
Exactly. So again, just asking questions in the right way. So maybe you're asking some questions.
People want to know too that you've put in a little bit of time at the beginning, that like you care enough to learn a little bit about this company up front.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, we'll cover that too in terms of, again, you did your pre-call planning. So you looked in between, you try to find something, and you want to let them know like, hey, like I do care. Exactly. And you do want to find throughout the whole sales process that right balance between uncovering needs and bringing quote unquote new commercial insights. So again, we talked about the challenger sale model. Mm-hmm. So again, if you remember back, and you can listen to that podcast too, the challenger sale model, you're looking at, how to teach and how to tailor, right? The old sales model, which you're looking at, which is basically uncover pain, present product, close, right? You need to have a good balance of both, because, you do have to ask some open-ended questions and you do have to uncover what's most important to them. But in the same token, you have to make it a little bit more real for them, and you have to really dive into, okay, so what is this problem costing me? Because lot of people won't actually realize, and you assume because you're dealing with that like all the time, and you're living in that world, like, oh well, this is why my product is better, and this is the problem that other people have, and
right.
being able to see the bigger picture. So, kind of diving into what that balance actually looks like in terms of balancing uncovering needs question versus presenting commercial insight. Talk about solid closing questions and all that good stuff. So before diving into that, just really quick, obviously in terms of your sales process, and this is something we started working with the guys over at Wrestling Mindset, shameless plug. So if you have any wrestlers, I would hop over to their website, go to wrestlingmindset.com. You can get a free trial for an individual wrestler, and you can also look at team options too. So again, a shameless plug there. But in terms of their prior sales process, a lot of their questions when they would talk to someone would be a lot of yes/no questions. So right now, working with some of their sales reps, we've actually changed things up a little bit. We ask a lot more open-ended questions, just to kind of give you an example. And if you do call for a trial session, you're going to be asked this exact question. Like when's the last time you felt like you didn't wrestle well because of nerves or overthinking? Prior, that question in their process was, have you ever lost the match because of nerves or because of overthinking or giving someone too much respect? So again, going back that open-ended question and again, linking back to Paul Smith, Sell with a Story, the best story questions are the ones, or the best stories are the ones that the actual customer has. So the best way to uncover those needs and the best way to really understand them is to get them talking. So to get those story questions. So for example, if I'm selling my services to help companies increase sales, maybe ask this question. So tell me a story about the last 3 guys, like when they missed their numbers. What did you do? That question is a lot more profound, will help you out a lot more. And again, establish rapport, help move the sales process along, and also help the person know that you really care about them and that you really want to have more insight versus how many of your salespeople are missing their numbers. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And you're not wasting their time either. You're not asking inane questions to get the yeses.
Yes.
Like you're just getting to the point, which is something again that has changed. That used to be a better and more useful tactic than it is currently.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I know you used that in the past and it worked well for you, but now we've gotten to the point where again that asking questions to get the yes is more familiar now. People are identifying it and rolling their eyes about it.
Yeah, so there was one sales training I went through and I almost wanted to like the way they did it, it wasn't.
Well, right.
And there was no evolution.
Into,
there was
the
no
tone too.
Exactly. Talking about getting all that nod momentum, which that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Because again, if you agree to something small, you're more likely to kind of agree to something big. For example,
but don't treat the person you're talking to like they're an idiot either. Exactly.
Yeah. It's not like a computer program where I'm just going to type in a couple inputs. I'm going to get some stuff out and then just move things along. I mean, you have to realize there's a human element to it. But you do have a good point. So what you were talking about too, in terms of that yes, no, I think of, and have you ever seen the movie Boiler Room?
Mm-mm.
Okay. It's got Giovanni Ribisi. It's got Ben Affleck in it. It's got Vin Diesel in it. And it's about, of course, which is why salespeople have a bad name, Vin Diesel. No, I was kidding. At one point in an actual sales meeting and stuff like that, he basically said, just get him to say yes. Ask him a rhetorical question, if I threw a lifeline, would you grab it? Yes, great. Pick up 1,000 stocks, pick up 1,000 shares, or something like that. And it's really, do you think that would actually work now?
Right.
But yeah, or you think of the old Looney Tunes, remember when they're yes, no, yes, no, no, yes. Okay, good. When Bugs Bunny gets the agreement, I think with Elmer Fudd or something like that. But when to use those yes, no questions, because again, you're taught as salespeople to ask good questions, and a lot of salespeople right now are opening up a little bit more. So obviously they're asking better questions, but there are some times when you do need to ask those yes or no questions. So What are those scenarios? When does that actually come up? In the beginning, I would say when you have a very difficult client or prospect. So someone that's not really opening up at all, they're not really like engaging in the conversation or anything like that. You might need to do that just to get them to open up, and then you can ask some more open-ended questions. You know, like for example, you know, if I were to deal with the I don't know, let's just say, I would say engineer, right? An engineer, and I have a different process for that engineer, for that company. I have some, you know, some process improvement things. And that engineer is clearly skeptical. Like he didn't want to be in the meeting. Someone else suggested it, a friend of a friend, whatever. So that person is very skeptical. So again, just ask too, you know, it seems like, go ahead.
I mean, I feel like it's similar to like if you're public speaking or, you know, speaking at a conference or anything, the amount of people are more willing earlier in the talk to raise their hand for a yes or no question or kind of like take a poll. Then if you ask an open-end question towards the beginning of your talk, you're not going to get any feedback.
Exactly. So again, if you talk about
it ruins the momentum.
If you talk about like an actual like pain point question, you know, so if you go and say like, you know, like, you wouldn't open stuff. This person's being closed-minded to, like, you know, like when's the last time a complete assembly line shutdown hurt your business, or like how much does that cost you a day? If someone's being very cold, you might not be able to get to that point where you're going to get a good response, because, you know,
can you rephrase that same question to be a yes no? Like, have you had this issue?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And again, that's a matter of gauging the actual openness and, you know, like where the prospect
your rapport
is,
with them already,
and your rapport with them. If you do have that rapport, and say, you know, how much, again, rather than saying when was the last time you had this problem, you could say like, how much did that cost you? Or like how often, or like how much damage has that done? Or maybe this, you know, so someone's being closed-minded or, you know, not open. You know, have you given any thought to the overall cost of when your assembly line shuts down, you know, like outside of your department, you know, or
which is a tricky thing, because you don't want to sound like you're making the assumption again that they haven't thought this through. So it's like a careful.
And again, so we talk about prefacing, and putting the right thing. So basically like this, like if you're like most engineers, so again, we talk about persuasion, you're super busy, you're just trying to keep things moving along, and maybe you haven't had the time to really assess the damage the last time you had it, when you had a shutdown. Is that something that's safe to say, like you're really busy, you have a million things going on, right? And you're going to say, yes, well, great.
Right. Give them that out.
You give them that out, and then you can transition to, all right, well, what my company does is we actually help prevent things before they actually happen. And if you have a couple minutes, I'd like to explain to you how we do that. Again, you got that first yes, and then you can kind of open up a little more. That's for someone who's being a little bit more closed off. So again, you have to have that right balance. So again, thinking back, if someone's closed off, you might need to ask some yes or no questions to kind of move things along. Actually, I had that the other day. So again, I switched industries. I'm working in something entirely new, and 95% of the people that I'm talking to I would say are fairly open. You know, because again, my process is completely different. You know, I go in there and I say, you know, I'm not going to give you a whole spiel. I'm not going to like dive into that. You know, help me understand. That question is a very solid one. Help me understand what you're doing about X, or help me understand what you're doing about Y. And there are some people that be like, no, if you can give me a spiel, I'd appreciate that. I'm like, really? You want a spiel? So those are some people that you want to ask like yes, no, like does this make sense to you? Or when you want to like pepper like those questions in. So those yes, no's are good like when you're actually doing the presentation itself, you know. So in the beginning it's uncovering needs, and then like when you're actually like presenting like an actual solution, you definitely want to have that feedback where you're not talking the whole time. So, you know, like for example, if my solution is like an engineering process or like a different widget to put in the machine too, like, you know, for example, like, hey, like I have this, it's made of a different kind of anodized aluminum. It doesn't wear down as much. So actually, you know, like this would have to only be replaced a third of the time versus what you're doing right now. I mean, does that sound like something that could possibly help you? You know, again, ask that, or, you know, like those like check-in questions, like those ones you can make like yes, no.
Right, because sometimes, I mean, especially if you drone on, they can just tune out too. So just the realization that like you're going to be checking, kind of like a teacher checking in with a particular student as they're going through a lesson, just so that they know that they have to be paying attention along the way. Like they have to stay engaged in case, so that you don't call them out and they had tuned out for the last 5 minutes.
Absolutely. And then ask the question in a way where it comes across as genuine. Like, I'll give an example. We had, and I can tell it was a bad sales presentation. Again, you're like, why did you invite this person? I'm like, I wanted to hear the pitch. We ordered we got like a sample of like.
I think we talked about this before at some point too.
Yeah, but like, just like assuming that like, like, oh, like where these meats come from, and there's a middleman and all that good stuff, and like making those assumptions, like, it's terrible for you.
Right. So, but I think that's the point too, that like, if you know what the answer is to a question, don't ask it, but also don't assume.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I was just kind of thinking, like, if you're trying to get the yeses, or you're trying to, like, at what point, like, does it sometimes make sense, even if you know the answer to the question, should you ask it, or should you only ask something that's going to actually genuinely give you insight or feedback?
So, obviously, you want more questions that are going to get you feedback and insight, but again, if you do know the answer to that question, but the person's being closed off, then you want to ask those kind of questions.
Okay.
So like more like assumptive things you don't necessarily need to do if you do have a more like engaging prospect. Like, for example, let's just say I was selling to you, I don't know, like podcast auditing services or something, or podcast editing services or something like that. I wouldn't be like, it sounds like you are really, really busy. If I know you're open and you're like, yes, like you reached out,
Right.
you're like, I need this service, like it takes a lot of time and all that good stuff. So rather I'd ask, like, how long are your podcasts, or how long is it taking you right now to do it? And that's more of an open-ended question versus like, do you feel a need for this? Because if someone might say, do you feel a need for this? And they're closed off.
Right.
No. Okay. End of conversation.
Right. P.S. Shout out to Scott, who's been editing our podcast and doing an amazing job.
Yes.
He's a lifesaver.
So again, talking about finding that balance. So the balance between, again, those yes/no questions. So again, yes/no questions, when you have someone, personality-wise, they're a little bit more closed off, or they're a little bit more quiet. Don't force them to open up in the beginning if they're not ready for that. Again, if this is your first time seeing them too, I mean, it might take a couple calls. It might take a little bit for them to open up. Person could be having a bad day. You don't know. So again, have that right balance, but on most situations, err on the side of open-ended questions. So again, can you see why this product that you're like, do you see that there are drawbacks to what you're using right now? Yes, no, whatever. Versus, have you ever given any consideration to possible alternatives for that? Or when's the last time you looked at an actual alternative to this solution? Again, a little bit more engaging question, or like, what other alternatives have you considered? Again, just look at your questions and look at the actual, level of engagement that you're getting. And like right now,
and just adapt on your feet.
Exactly. And then sometimes you need to ask a question. And you talk about repeating something, or like something that like you already like know the answer to. Sometimes you have that, like you've already uncovered that, but it didn't really like hit home. It's like, I get that there's a problem with that, but it's not 100% at the actual forefront. So with that, like, you have to reword the question to kind of get to the same answer, but maybe make it a little bit more profound, or maybe have that conversation again. So like right now,
understanding what really matters to them.
Especially when you have a consumable product or some kind of product where, again, you're selling the same thing over and over again, and you're just trying to increase that market share. So again, you might have, rather than change up your message every time, just like come up with a different way to say it. Like, for example, like Ford. Like, do you know Ford's little slogan?
Go places.
I think that's one of them. And for their trucks.
Built Ford tough.
Built Ford tough. Ford doesn't really deviate from that. They're repeating the same message, but they're saying it in a different way. So sometimes you have to think of like questions that would do that. So for like Ford, some of their commercials are, like, are you whatever, like on the job? You don't have time to whatever. I don't know. That's a bad example, but like, they have like that like voice, and it kind of conveys that whole like built Ford tough.
Right. Everything is reflects that same that target customer.
Exactly. And again, going back to that balance of, again, questions that you need to ask in terms of yes, no, questions you need to ask to repeat the same point. Because again, it takes sometimes 4 to 5 times for somebody to actually get it. And sometimes you have to ask the same question again.
Maybe not intellectually get it, but to just...
To keep it top of mind. Intellectually, you might get that. Like, for example, intellectually, I know that if I were to do my taxes now, okay, I would get the refund or whatever, or I would, have to pay out the small amount and get it out of the way and have that out of the back of my head.
Right.
So the whole point is, like, again, it's something you should do right away. So you might word it in a different way, like, basically be like, what's rather,
well,
like have you done this? So like have you done your taxes, right? And people say no. Oh, okay, and if you want to like nag me and bug me to do it, which it's the opposite. I nag myself.
Right. Well, the thing that comes to mind as far as that is Squarespace. I feel like they advertise on almost every podcast that I listen to.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard it, I understood it. I was like, that's a good idea. That makes sense. I got it intellectually, but it wasn't something that I started recommending to people asking about websites or considering. Like, I didn't even start recommending it as an option until I had heard it multiple times. And now it's something that, like, when I hear that somebody's like, what should I use to start a website? Instead of just being like WordPress, I'm like WordPress or Squarespace.
Oh yeah. And it could be for anything too. Like, Gary Vee, at first I didn't like Gary Vee because, like, some of his videos, like, he kind of comes across as a little bit,
It's a lot.
Like, it's a little arrogant, a little bit, like, again, like, and then, like, basically, like, I don't know, I'm not going to go into that, but again, like him or like certain services like HubSpot, like, because I've had sales calls from HubSpot that weren't good. So I'm like, I'm not a fan of that. And then, like, now, like, seeing like what they do and what they work with, like, again, that kind of repetition. But going back to that, like, tax question, so say like, hey, have you had a chance to do your taxes? Or let's say your client was supposed to do something. So again, talk about what we talked about in previous podcasts, setting deadlines. So let's say, all right, hey, did you dig up your previous invoices so we can audit that? No, blah, blah, blah. I haven't had time. Give me a call next week. Maybe a better question to ask is say, hey, like, what's stopping you from getting this done? Maybe there's something I can do to help you out. So like, or like, hey, like, what's preventing you from moving forward with this?
Yeah.
Again, that's an open-ended question versus a yes/no question. It's reinforcing the exact same thing. I want you to do this.
Right.
When I ask that yes/no, it's like yes/no and the thing's over. And then again, when you think about buyer's limited time,
they don't want to keep answering a similar question or feel like you're digging. So if you ask it as a yes/no, you might not have the chance to rephrase it as an open-ended thing. And
let's say you've already made that mistake. Let's say you did the yes/no.
Okay.
Right. And so, like, for example, I wanted the client to do this. And then they say, we'll follow up with that. Again, you can go back to that open-ended question. Great. Will anything come up if I follow up with you on Friday in between now and then that would prevent you from being on this call? Or that would prevent you from getting this? Is there anything in the way? Or like one of my favorite questions is, would there anyone be here who would be unhappy if you move forward with that? Right. Again, talk about uncovering those needs. A lot of times when going into sales themselves, and some of the better questions you want to ask, it's just a matter of not being specific enough or not knowing like what the size of the deal is and not qualifying on the front end. So as an example, I'll give you an example without going into what I do specifically. I asked the doctor, have you had a chance to use my product? And the answer was no. And I was like, okay, So, and again, the doctor had to run, so I couldn't even go into that. Then when I followed up with him, say, hey, have you ran into this specific case where I knew that product would have been appropriate?
Right.
And he said, no, I have not ran into that at all. So then I know it's not my product. It's just there hasn't been me. It hasn't been an actual need. So maybe ask that too. Like, so for example, if you're doing auditing services or you're doing some kind of widget or something like that. Like, hey, have you had a need for this recently? Or like, have you had a need to kind of evaluate your insurance options or whatever? Or when do you look at this? Or like, how often do you see that? So again, better questions. So in the beginning, knowing how big of an actual opportunity is this? Because sometimes you'll follow up with the lead, and it's just not a big enough size too.
Right, like you've talked about before. Not every customer is going to be a good customer.
Exactly, and making assumptions. So if you look at your data and you say like, oh, your research says, hey, this client should be $100,000 solution. Other people in this space is $100,000 solution, and maybe this client, this is only a $10,000 solution.
Right,
having that in place. So then everyone's favorite part, and a lot of people ask about this. Closing questions. Okay, so what are ways to close more effectively? So you want to, when you close, you want to think about some things that you want to preface. Okay, so for example, you want to let the customer know like it's okay for them to tell you no.
Right.
And there are different ways to do it. So going back to when I was doing home improvement sales, it was a lot of times I'd preface it in the beginning and basically be like, look, I have an idea. I think I might be able to kind of close things up a little bit. But, I'm going to ask you, don't worry about my feelings. Okay. Sometimes people tell me, yes, I like this. Let's go ahead and do that. My favorite answer. Sometimes people will say, no, it's not for me. And that's okay. No is actually my second favorite answer. And then sometimes what people will do, and I don't think that this is you. They'll say, we need to think about it. We're not ready. Let me look over this. And really what they want to say is, this isn't right for me.
Right.
And I'll tell you,
don't waste your time. Don't waste my time.
Exactly. But you don't want to say that too. Like, look, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. There are times where you do want to do that, where you do want to like walk away to close. Basically, look, like I'm trying to be a resource for you. I have a bunch of other people who I can see. I'm sure you have other people that you would want to look at for this. If this isn't a priority, that's fine. Just let me know. Versus having someone like kind of like lead you along. So questions in the beginning, like how important of an actual priority is this for you? And again, this is where you're doing your research up front, knowing that this person does this, this, and this, and this. And you are the seventh responsibility or seventh in order of his responsibilities, and your solution is not at the top of his mind. I'm dealing with trying to replace 5 employees, and you're talking to me about a $5,000 piece of copying equipment that I'm like, I'll deal with it when I deal with it, right? Yeah. So again, kind of having those like compelling needs. Again, I'm just throwing out an example, selling copiers or whatever. So we talk about closing, again, some of those preface questions, and then same thing in the beginning. Just a little preface can make a question more powerful. So sometimes you don't need to make any changes to the questions you have, especially if you've taken a lot of time to figure out like what questions work for you, what like really helps you get insight, what gets the client talking. But you just need to add something in the beginning that knows like, hey, I did my research, or like, hey, like I need to push you in a certain direction, or I need to pull you in a certain direction.
Right.
Shameless plug, push-pull sales. Yeah, you didn't like that.
Well, they're already listening.
They're already listening. I know. Whatever. I'm throwing it all in shameless plugs. Ford, Wrestling Mindset, Push-Pull Sales, Squarespace. I
don't think Ford needs our help at
Ford
this point.
doesn't need our help. But again, talking about good closing questions. So going into that. So for example, a weak closing question would be, would you consider? Would you think about going with me? Mm-hmm. Again, you asked a yes/no question, right? And again, at the end, you want to close, you want to get a yes/no answer, right? Preferably a yes. So a better way would, rather than say, would you consider, okay, would you feel comfortable moving forward? Because you're asking how they feel. And again, you talk about someone who's a little bit more emotional. Maybe you want to tailor it that way. Or again, if the person's a little bit more auditory, and we talked about this in terms of learning styles, does moving forward sound like the right idea to you? Okay. It's a little bit softer versus like, will you do business with me now?
Right.
Sometimes you need to be that specific,
right.
And again, in every step of the way. Like, because a lot of times people be like, well, I'm not sure like when they're planning on doing it, or I'm not sure about this.
Right.
Why didn't you ask?
But then who has that answer? Like, do I need to be talking to somebody else that has that?
The other thing in terms of closing, you want to set deadlines. You want to set those expectations too. So when you're closing and asking those questions. So again, a sort of preface. So let's say you're not in a situation where you have a quote unquote, I think Simon Sinek calls some kind of like manipulator. And I don't mean that like you bring in the closer and he like does whatever, like an incentive, something that would make somebody move along quicker, a discount or something like that. Let's say you don't have that. How would you get that person to kind of move along when you do ask for the business and it's more of a softer close, or they have to do something a couple days in between where it's not, I get the contract right away, where there is some kind of like, where there is some kind of like break in between. So for example, in my position, medical sales, you deal with that. You know, you talk to the provider. You have your solution, your product, your knee replacement, your whatever that you have in there, and then there's a time in between where they see the patient or whatever they need to do, and then they actually use or don't use that. Set up the expectation. Be like, look, would you feel comfortable using this? The next time you see that again. Give them something specific at the end. So the next time you run into this, will you use it? You got to be careful with that too, because we talk about what buyers won't tell you. Some buyers will tell you, don't give me a quota. Don't pressure me, whatever. Like, I'm not an idiot. Don't make me feel like that way. Like, so let's say, I have a buyer that uses like 4 or 5 different products for the exact same thing, and they like to rotate and all that good stuff, they're not going to switch. I mean, unless you do a really, really good job, everything to you overnight, unless you have a compelling reason, right? Yeah. So you don't want to say like, hey, for the next 25 times you need to buy paper towels, you come to me. No, it's kind of a bit much. And say, look, the next time you have a sample order, will you go ahead and place that with me? Or say like, or again, preface. Most of the people I talk to, what they do is to give it a fair trial run to see our service, they'll actually use us 10 times to really see how it fits. Because again, if you do that, like you beg for that like one shot, That's when I whacked the blue snowball. You beg for that one shot, and then what happens? Something bad happens. So when I worked in logistics, just give me a shipment. Let me try. We'll do good. Blah, blah, blah. And then one shipment, something bad happens, and then that customer never sees the other 2,722 times where everything goes well. Right. So again, preface that too. Well,
and I feel like it's kind of like asking a girl out for coffee instead of handing her a ring.
I like that. Because it's good analogy, because it's all about the relationship, right? It's all about the relationship. So what you want to do in those situations is make sure you have the right ask, and make it specific, but don't make it insulting. Yeah. Ask for the coffee. You don't want to present the ring. Maybe you want to say, hey, can I get your number? I want to ask you out. So I want to take you out for coffee sometime, versus like, hey, can I get your number?
So I can text you at 2 a.m.
So I can text you at 2 a.m. You up? Exactly. I was going to say that exact thing. And then put in the part about following up. So letting them know that too. So like, for example, I did make this mistake, and I will admit this, for Wrestling Mindset, actually. I let people off the hook. I let some people off the hook because everything was going well. And, everyone was basically, because they saw the value in the service, they were signing up. So then I did what kind of becomes easy when you get tired, or when you're like doing a lot. You fall into old habits. You do whatever's easiest. So, okay, I'll send you pricing. Whenever you're ready, just send that back to me, Right. Versus like, hey, take a look at that, because you have to discuss with this person. This person's not available, right? And this could be any kind of sales environment. And then say, if everything makes sense, this is what I'm going to do. Okay. If it doesn't make sense, let me know. Okay. If I don't hear back from you, I will follow up here. Right. I will do this here, and give a date and give a time. So the person knows that you have those expectations. You are going to follow up. So that way, when you do call in a week,
but you also said that you would give them like that their answer can be no.
Yes, and I always make that very clear in the beginning. Be like, look, this isn't for everybody, and that's pretty much for any service.
Because if it's not a good fit for them, then you don't want that client either. Then you might be fighting. You spend the time to bring them on. You in wrestling mindsets, you line them up with a wrestling mindset coach, and then they're canceling appointments, and the mindset coach is frustrated, and they want to cancel and then they want their money back, and it just turns into like a big thing if they're not the right customer.
Exactly. I mean, you can steamroll somebody into doing something, or
Yeah.
you can do that for any product and service. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
fine, whatever. Like, all right, I'll order paper, like toiletries or something like that. I'll order from your website one time just to get this guy off my back. Like, there's some salespeople who will consider that an actual success. Like, I got an order in, like whatever.
Right.
Little did they know that was just to get them to go away, and then they're going to duck you forever.
Yeah.
So again, set up those expectations that you will follow up, and again, that you will follow up after the actual sale too, where they do know that, hey,
You don't just disappear.
exactly. Like what I would do when I was selling logistics, and what I would train my salespeople to do too, is let them know up front too, like, hey, let's get started with this. Let's go ahead and do your inbound shipments. I am going to plant a bug in your ear. We do a very good job in terms of international and customs clearance. I will come back, and again, after you see the service and how good of a job we do, I am going to ask for that business. So that way, when I do circle back in a month or two or a couple weeks or whatever is appropriate, they know that I was going to ask for that business. And then you have another reason to call them, like, look, like, hey, you knew I said I was going to do this, versus basically like, oh, he's just trying to sell me something else, whatever. And again, it's how you come across and all that good stuff. And one last thing, and we'll do this in another podcast, talking about finding the right fit. Knowing when to walk away, and knowing like how full your pipeline needs to be to get things done. Because there are times where I will admit, like, especially like in the home improvement sales, where I was like, I don't want to say like desperate, but like I was like, I really need this sale. And there are times where I wanted to walk away from the business because not a matter of being the right fit, but it's a matter of like, something didn't mesh well with the actual person. Like, for example, you don't want to be in a situation where, I don't know, like, I'll give the example. I needed this sale, and there was a pregnant smoking woman. And I was like, I didn't want to be there. But I needed that sale. And then she's like, oh, don't judge me, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I hope you don't think. And you kind of have to like smile and nod. Or for example, and this is nice where I actually could say something when I was like better off, like someone like used like, someone said retard or something like that. And like in a very offensive way. And I stood up. I was like, look, like this is not, it's not appropriate. And I had enough things in my pipeline where if that person like never came back, and that person said, no, you know what, you're right, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But you do need to have
the ability to take that risk.
Yeah. So I'll have another one too, where again, a lot of those were selling windows and selling doors.
Well, yeah, that's a different, when you're selling direct to consumer and you're walking into people's homes. Yeah. You see a lot of things. Like, again, like the most like ignorant, like racist stuff possible, but I needed the sale, and I had to like I had to listen to it. And then, like, no, if I did a better job prospecting, or if I did a better job working on closing these other deals, I wouldn't be in the situation where I'm dealing with that, or like where I'm not with that client that like, like it's your less than ideal client where you didn't do a good enough job with that. So we'll have another podcast and share some of those fun stories about, or maybe not so fun stories. It's just tough when you're starting out. I mean, that was your first sales gig? That was one of my very first sales gigs. That was a tall order. You had a lot to deal with in that one.
Absolutely. But again, just wrapping up real quick. So asking the right questions. So one, have the right balance, linked more towards open-ended questions. The yes, no is appropriate when you have that closed off person. Maybe in the beginning to kind of open things up when that person is closed off. Take a look at your questions. What are some things you can add to the beginning to have that sort of like persuasiveness? And we talk about persuasive basically, like where you'd say, look, like you sound like somebody who enjoys the finer things in life. And let me ask you, like, have you like, you look, it seems like you would really enjoy like a nice, like long vacation, right? Like you seem like you like to get out and like to do stuff, right? And I get that yes, no question, or, like the actual persuasiveness, like, I looked on your website, I couldn't find this, versus help me point me in the right direction. So again, you say like, I did my work.
Right. I tried.
Exactly. Help me out. Which, I mean, most people want to help other people out, right? And then same thing too, going through then when you ask the right questions up front, or the right persuasive, those closing questions, just some real quick sample closes. Do you feel comfortable moving forward? Or, hey, like, I've been here a couple times, we've discussed this. what's holding you back? Again, versus a yes, no question. What's holding you back? What's stopping you? What keeps you up at night? Like what do you have in the back of your head that kind of prevents you from moving forward versus like,
it doesn't matter what's in the back of your head. You need to move forward.
Right. Or maybe like this question is a very powerful closing question, like, do you have enough decision right now to make a decision? Or enough information to make a decision right now. Again, that would be an okay yes or no question. Have I provided, or is there any additional information I need to provide to help you make a solid decision? And you might say, no, I'm ready to go now. And asking that question earlier on too can actually help close the deal, especially when you have those inbound leads. They might say, hey, like, I looked at your website. I like this. I just have a question. Like, can I finance this or something like that? And then maybe like actual like persuasiveness. So so if I'm able to get you that financing and move everything forward, do you have any other concerns with that? No, you get the financing. It's like, great, I got you the financing that you want on this product or service. Can we move forward now? Yes. Again, but those actual closing questions, and we can kind of dive into a little bit more into some of the actual specifics. But again, just some of the normal format and just some tweaks you can do to your questioning skills, when to use yes, no, things you can add before, and more powerful questions to ask. If you would like help with that, you can always send us an email.
And also we've set it up on Patreon that one of your options at one of the levels for monthly contribution that you get an initial call with Marcella where you guys can just talk and figure things out and ask any of your questions
you can send me your sales script.
So other than that, that wraps things up for the week. Thank you to bensound.com for our intro and outro music. And thanks to you guys, as always, for listening. You can tune in next time where we will tackle another topic. Go check out patreon.com/pushpullsales to support the show. You can view our show notes and resources at pushpullsales.com. Instagram and Twitter is at pushpullsales. And you can always email us pushpullsales@gmail.com. But thanks, guys. We'll talk to you later.
See ya.